This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. I'm your host, Jim Cuddy. On today's show, Pepsi and Coke, Wendy's and McDonald's, just some of the corporate titans that belong to a taxpayer-funded right-wing lobbying organization called ALEC. Common Cause President Bob Edgar joins us to expose the organization that wrote Stand Your Ground laws for 18 state legislatures. Is Mitt Romney too rich to be president? Regular commentator Catherine Poe says it isn't his money that's at issue, it's his attitude toward it. And Bill Press talks with Judd Legum of Think Progress about why Obamacare is here to stay. Are you tired of Tea Party Republicans and Rush Limbaugh dominating the airwaves? Do you want the facts you won't get on Fox or even on CNN? Then stay tuned. Our sponsor, 21st Century Democrats, works hard to get everyday Democrats involved in returning our party to its roots and to success at the ballot box. Sit back and listen, then stand up and fight, and follow 21st Century Democrats on Facebook for all the latest progressive news. We're glad you can join us. Bob Edgar is a former congressman who knows how lobbying works. In fact, he heads the public interest lobby, Common Cause. Mr. Edgar has filed a complaint with the IRS exposing the lobbying tactics of a right-wing group that funds its nefarious work with tax-deductible contributions. Not the way lobbying is supposed to work. And joining us today on americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats, Bob Edgar is the president and CEO of Common Cause. Before that, he served 12 years as a congressman from Pennsylvania and then 7 years as general secretary of the National Council of the Churches of Christ. He's been at Common Cause since 2007. Recently, Common Cause has taken the American Legislative Exchange Council to court over its use of the tax code to lobby. Bob Edgar, it's a pleasure to have you with us. Thank you very much for joining us on americasdemocrats.org.
It's great to be with you today.
Now, to follow up with you about the Common Cause lawsuit against an organization most Americans have never heard of, the American Legislative Exchange Council, tell us about the organization, which I should mention is known by its acronym ALEC.
Well, first, let me make just a minor correction in your comment. What we did is we filed an official IRS whistleblower complaint. It's not a lawsuit. In 2006, Republicans and Democrats who were fighting tax fraud set up an agency inside the IRS to evaluate organizations and individuals who were fraudulently operating. And what Common Cause has found is that the American Legislative Exchange Council, an organization made up of approximately 2,000 state representatives, but hundreds of corporations, has been operating for the last 40 years. And when they file their tax information, they indicate that they do zero lobbying and that they are a charity. Well, about a year and a half ago, we received about 5,000 documents, internal documents of ALEC, the American Legislative Exchange Council. And as we reviewed those, we discovered that they do 60 to 70% of their work as hardcore lobbying. Corporations get a tax deduction for their $5,000 to $25,000 of dues that they pay. They get a tax deduction when they spend hundreds of thousands of dollars wining and dining state legislative candidates. And ALEC has operated this way for a ton of years. We believe, as indicated by our legal counsel, that they have been fraudulently operating. And that's why organizations like Coca-Cola and Pepsi and Wendy's and McDonald's and Blue Cross, and just last week when ALEC was having its annual meeting out in Salt Lake City, ALEC was startled by the fact that Walgreens and General Motors left in the middle of their conversation, their convention. And I think it's because these corporations are really worried that they may in fact be caught up in this tax fraud issue, but they're also worried in staining their brands. Most of the organizations that have fled ALEC have been organizations that are companies that have a strong brand identity.
Now, you served in Congress for 12 years. How is what ALEC does different from what lobbyists traditionally did? Or Or how is it different from even what Common Cause does today? Explain that to us.
Well, first, I did serve for 12 years in Congress, so I know what lobbying looks like, what it smells like, what it acts like, and ALEC is a lobbying organization. And the difference between ALEC and Common Cause is that Common Cause is filing with the IRS as a tax organization that does not get tax deduction when someone gives a check to Common Cause, because half of our work is hardcore lobbying. I have staff in 21 states, organization in 37 states. We do work inside the Washington Beltway as lobbyists, and we would never think to have any of that money as tax-deductible money. That's what we call the 501c4 operation. We also have a 501c3 operation. If ALEC was only doing an educational function, if they were writing informative reports, if they were doing non-political work, they can clearly operate as a 501c3. But what ALEC has done is only operated as a C3, even though 60 to 70% of everything they do, as indicated by the 4,700 documents that we gave to the IRS, they do the same thing that hardcore lobbying does. When General Motors or General Electric hires lobbyists to go and give talking points to legislators, when they have receptions, when they make political contributions, all of that is recorded as lobbying activities. They have to record and be public and transparent about their lobbying. They don't get tax reduction for that. However, when they do that inside of ALEC, they have been taking tax reduction and tax credit for their gifts to ALEC. And we're going to let the IRS decide whether Common Cause is right or whether ALEC is right. One of the neat things is we have a pro bono law firm out in San Francisco who gets hundreds of requests to do whistleblower tax fraud cases against individuals and organizations. And our whistleblower law firm, who reviewed all of these documents, says that our complaint is the strongest they've seen. They're very confident that the IRS will agree with us, and more companies will flee. And if they don't flee, they'll be charged with tax fraud and may, in fact, have millions of dollars of taxes and penalties that they'll have to pay because of their involvement in ALEC. The Red Cross is a charity. The Red Cross is a charity. Your homeless shelter in your local community is a charity. ALEC is not a charity. It's a hardcore lobbying operation.
We're speaking with Bob Edgar, President and CEO of Common Cause. I think you've mentioned a few, but who are some of the other everyday companies Americans have heard about that support ALEC?
Well, State Farm Insurance supports ALEC. Up till recently, they even received a gift from Melinda and Bill Gates Foundation, but they have since fled. Kraft and Procter & Gamble have fled. These were all up until April when the Stand Your Ground Trayvon Martin shooting occurred in Florida, which put ALEC on the front page of all the newspapers. They were all very much part of ALEC. The Koch brothers, Charles and David Koch of Koch Industries, have remained part of ALEC. And last week, many of those corporations were still hanging on. The National Rifle Association is a strong member of ALEC and has been for many years.
The interests of ALEC members aren't really just about good government or a sound economy, then, are they?
Unfortunately, many of the corporate interests are for corporate profits. For example, the prison industry, the for-profit prison industry, has built prisons all over the country, and they're very interested in spreading things like the immigration law that gives opportunity to pick up people who aren't carefully documented, hold them almost indefinitely, and get financial reward for every prisoner that they put in these for-profit prisons that have extra space. Also, just recently, the Senate of the United States released a 2-year study of for-profit educational institutions that are taking in students, helping them to get federal government loans and grants through the Pell Grant and other grant opportunities. But there are a whole host of the for-profit educational institutions that have now been exposed to spend federal government money on lobbying, in fact, more money on lobbying than they do on instruction of those students. And many of the students who get recruited then quit after a year with high indebtedness. ALEC has been really pushing these private educational for-profit institutions, and they love sitting side by side with state representatives. And one of the interesting nuances of the 9 task groups that ALEC has, the corporate interest sits side by side with the legislative interest and have veto power over any of the bills that are moving forward. They can, in fact, stop bills that don't help them and start legislative efforts across the country that do help them. Some of ALEC bills have been trying to suppress the vote. The ID laws have been spread across by ALEC, trying to stop same-day registration or early voting, things to make sure that persons of color, the elderly, and students shrink their impact on voting. And that's all being done by ALEC, who claims to be a charity.
Mm. Bob, how did the Trayvon Martin case tip you off that something needed to be done about the tax-exempt status of ALEC?
Well, first of all, we sent a 16-page letter to the IRS on the 14th of July last year, so we've been involved in this for a long time. But when the Trayvon Martin shooting took place, it was discovered that the National Rifle Association went to Florida early on and passed something called Stand Your Ground, which gave the shooter of Trayvon Martin the ability to claim that he was simply standing his ground. When we looked into it further, we discovered that the National Rifle Association passed it in Florida. Florida legislators and the National Rifle Association took it to ALEC, spread it across to 17 or 18 other states, and that became very controversial in the news. And so ALEC, that has been out of sight, out of mind, kind of under the surface with not very much light being shown on it, suddenly came to the fore, and suddenly many of these corporations started to flee because they didn't want to be connected with these with the Stand Your Ground law or some of the other conservative social issues that ALEC has been pushing for years. And so that's where the controversy made public concern, and we used that public concern then to file our whistleblower complaint.
We're speaking with Bob Edgar, President and CEO of Common Cause. Grover Norquist, who holds Republicans hostage with his no tax pledge, is also a lobbyist. Do you have any indication that he, too, is using taxpayer dollars to engage in legislative lobbying?
Well, I came back on the airplane with him from Salt Lake City last week. He was a keynote speaker at the ALEC event in Salt Lake City. I don't have any evidence that he himself or his organization is using taxpayer money to pursue his no new tax pledges that have impacted on how legislators vote on taxes and tax increases. But I know he supports organizations like ALEC by his presence, by his influence, and I had a good opportunity to talk with him the other day and remind him of our concern that ALEC has a right to exist. Legislators have a right to get together and put model bills together as long as they pay their own way and are not wined and dined by these large corporations and not taking public dollars for their work through tax reductions and tax breaks. Each legislator has to pay $100 for a 2-year membership. But for that, they get sent to nice hotels, spas, and other retreats, sometimes taking their wives and families at no expense, because the corporations pay anywhere from $5,000 to $25,000 for annual membership, and over and above that, pay hundreds of thousands of dollars to rent out these spas and fancy resorts to wine and dine the legislators. And if that's not lobbying, I don't know what lobbying is.
Well, and in your recent op-ed on the ALEC case, you had mentioned that you were in fact lobbied in your 12 years in Congress, but not like this. Is there anything you miss about serving in Congress?
Oh, I miss a lot of things about serving in Congress. When I served in Congress, the special interest groups were there, but they came first with their talking points. It was only after they watched how you voted that the ones that liked you came with legal contributions, fully transparent. Money was important then. Your enemies didn't bother you at all. They were out trying to get you defeated. It was your friends who expected 100% response to their 10 or 12 issues that they wanted. They thought you were the best thing since sliced bread, and they wanted your picture on their brochures, and they wanted legal political action contributions to go to your campaign. I won 6 elections in that system for the House of Representatives, and I thought it was helpful to have the talking points. I would like to see us move to a system of public financing of campaigns so that the talking points would stay, but the checkbook would disappear. What has changed in recent years is that many elected officials, both Democrats and Republicans, want the checks first and care little about the talking points. If you want to be a congressman for the rest of your life in the House of Representatives, it's easy for you to shape your voting record with those you know will give you contributions or will set up super PACs on your behalf that can in fact receive now, since Citizens United, the Supreme Court decision, money that is undisclosed, money that comes from both wealthy and corporate interest. If you get elected in a relatively safe district, you can stay forever. And many times those congressmen who want to be elected for life care less about talking points and more about the money. We've got to get back to the point where when all the reforms take place, we'll still have lobbyists, but the lobbyists will be there to influence by their ideas and by their talking points and their words, and not by the size of their checks.
Bob Edgar is the president and CEO of Common Cause. Bob, we appreciate your time with us today on americasdemocrats.org and appreciate the work that you're doing.
Great to be with you.
Thank you, and we look forward to speaking with you again soon. This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. We want you to sit back and listen, but we need you to stand up and fight. Do you want to get involved and help get our party back to its roots and to success at the ballot box? You can make your contribution to Democrats for America's Future and help us keep this show going and to elect Democrats who will stand up for democratic principles. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page. This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. Coming up in just a few minutes, regular contributor and columnist Catherine Poe says life has been too easy for Mitt Romney, and that's why he can't connect with regular people. But right now, we turn to Jim Hightower, America's #1 populist, for his common sense commentary.
If you thought that right-wing politicos couldn't get any goofier, take a peek at Texas on cruise control. Ted Cruz is America's latest Tea Party darling. He just pulled off a contortion in Texas that few would have thought humanly possible. He got to the right of Governor Rick Perry, himself a former Tea Party darling who's such a far-out know-nothing that he's best known for putting the goober in gubernatorial. However, in the recent Republican primary, Cruz squinched himself Houdini-like into even further out political positions than Perry has taken, thus defeating the guy whom Perry wanted to be the party's nominee for a seat in the U.S. Senate. How far out is he, you ask? One of the white-hot talking points Cruz used to fire up the narrow extremists who now control the Texas GOP is that he will, by God, defend America's golf courses. You might not have realized that golf course defense is a burning national issue crying out for U.S. Senate attention, but such deep vigilance is apparently what makes Cruz a Tea Party fave. He says that he has ferreted out a diabolical United Nations plot to, quote, abolish unsustainable environments, including golf courses. Attention patriots, grab your putters and rush to your local links, for the UN is coming. To burnish his crazy bona fides, Cruz adds that, quote, the originator of this grand scheme is George Soros. While Cruz promises to save American golfers from this Tea Party boogeyman, he says he also intends to save all of us from Social Security by turning our retirement money over to the altruistic geniuses of Wall Street. Oh, let's get rid of unemployment benefits too, because, explains Professor Cruz, helping the jobless increases unemployment. This is Jim Hightower saying, Cruz is what's happening to the Republican Party nationally, veering from conservative to crazy.
Need an antidote to the progressive blues? Want some good news about how grassroots folks are rebelling against the corporate powers and winning? Well, here's an easy-to-swallow pill for you, the Hightower Lowdown. Hightower's monthly newsletter will give you the lowdown, even as it lifts you up. It's 4 pages a month, jam-packed with facts you can use, actions you can take, and Jim's own Texas humor, all for only $15 a year. To become a lowdowner, go to hightowerlowdown.org.
This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. Mitt Romney just doesn't relate to the average voter. Commentator Catherine Poe thinks she knows why. His money has sheltered him from the vicissitudes of life and made it seem normal to take a $77,000 tax credit for a dressage horse. And joining us today on americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats, Catherine Poe writes the ad-lib blog for the Washington Times Communities. She's a former president of Long Island National Organization of Women, and she was selected by Progressive Maryland as one of the top progressives in the state, along with Senator Barbara Mikulski and Congresswoman Donna Edwards. Catherine Poe, thank you so much for joining us today on americasdemocrats.org.
It's my pleasure, Jim.
Always nice to talk to you as well. You asked the following question in a recent column. Is Romney too rich to be president? So, what's your answer, considering we've had many rich presidents who were successful?
Yeah, and that's true. I mean, and are well-liked and well-regarded. But it's not, I don't think the money so much. One of the big pieces, I think, is his attitude about his money more than anything else. It's almost, he's sort of like, sort of has like the Trump attitude. And it's sort of interesting because not all rich people have that. Sort of, you know, who are rich people who have that attitude. But he has that sort of like who has the most toys wins. I mean, when you start peeling back that facade that he has, you start seeing, I mean, just to give you a couple examples, of course, one of the most famous now, I think most people know, is about that house he has out in La Jolla, California, that, you know, of course, he has a waterfront property, and we'd expect that and all. But, of course, he's in the process, but he's waiting until after the election. But he's already started the process to actually more than triple the size of it on the beach. And, of course, it's irritating everybody because, you know, it's the usual thing about that McMansion like that going to block everybody's views. But what's sort of interesting is that it will have an elevator for his cars, 4 cars, so cars with elevators, which is sort of interesting. He has also hired a lobbyist, all right, so he can get his water features. I don't know what that yet means. His water features in there. I mean, not too many average people have that. And it's sort of like, wow, this is, when you stop and think about FDR's home in New Hyde Park or even Hyannisport for the Kennedys, it's you know, it's not that ostentatiousness. And the other thing, I'll just give you one more example of toys, is these dressage horses that they own, even though he keeps saying you're Ann's. But and Ann, when she was interviewed about them, asked how much they cost and how much money she'd spent. She said, "Oh, I'm not going to tell you that because he doesn't even know." All right. Well, they're very expensive horses. I understand some can go up to $1 million. But what's most interesting, which I don't think most people know, is that he's getting a tax deduction of $77,000 on each horse. All right. So that's like, wow, that is very, very interesting. So he has that, and then he has that attitude about I like to fire people, which we all remember, which that, you know, that kind of a thing. And he makes these flippant comments about, well, you know, about NASCAR, but he hangs out with the owners. It's that doesn't relate to the average person who's going to the NASCAR races, I wouldn't think.
Yeah.
So I think that's that's what people are sort of uncomfortable with.
Well, one of the interesting things about voting behavior is that poor people and middle-class people so often identify with the political views of rich people. Otherwise progressives would always win elections, right? I mean, so how do you account for that disconnect?
Yeah, and that can be a problem. But part of it is it's part of the American dream. You can be rich too. As I wrote in the column, everybody's like one scratch away on the lottery ticket from being a millionaire. So Americans really don't resent people having money. They see they can have money too, that they will have money. In fact, when they interview them in polls, they basically all think that they're going to make it big, either through their own sweat or through luck. And so there isn't a resentment of people being rich, and they will vote for them. In fact, they sort of admire them because people who make money shows that you've achieved the American dream. So it's even though a lot of these people are not rags to riches, but just inherited wealth, riches to riches, or more riches, it's still, there's not that resentment because they actually identify that could be them. So I think that's why that happens. And therefore, they're sort of like protecting their future riches, which is a very strange attitude, but I think that's a lot what goes on.
Mm-hmm. Now, if most Americans love rich people, as you said in the column, why isn't Mitt Romney a bigger hit with the electorate?
Yeah, well, I think anybody watches him, either as rallies. Actually, I think he's probably better when he's making standard speeches because we expect people who are making speeches to be a little bit more stiff. But when he's out on the trail and making speeches, he has problems connecting. He appears out of touch. He's awkward. Somebody had said to me, which I thought was really good, they said he comes across as uncomfortable in his own skin. Now, I don't think he's uncomfortable in his own skin. I think he's uncomfortable in the skin he has to wear when he's campaigning and going out there. He isn't comfortable glad-handing people and shaking their hand in diners. That's not what he really likes to do. And he is a very closed, really a buttoned-up type. He basically unbuttons his shirt buttons when he goes out and rolls up his sleeves to look like one of the guys there. But there is something about him that comes across, and it's not patrician, because, boy, you can't get more patrician than FDR was at that cigarette holder and that profile. But it's like he doesn't have that common touch, and a lot of rich people do. I have talked about people like Rockefeller. My God, Rockefeller would plump down in the nearest ethnic diner and chew up a pastrami sandwich and let the grease dribble down his chin. Very, very different, and yet you can't get probably much more rich than a Rockefeller, although it's beginning to look like Romney might be.
Yeah. We're speaking with Catherine Poe, writes the Ad Lib blog for the Washington Times Communities. Do you think the reticence of a lot of people to fall for Romney is because how he got rich, through the financial wheeling and dealing instead of building and making things?
I do, because even if you were getting rich off of oil wells, all right, or building cars, there's something tangible there. This new way of making financial wealth is very alien to most Americans. It's not; they don't get it. It's not an industry. It's out there in some kind of netherworld. And then when you learn, what it's really about. Now, one of the things the Romney campaign stays away from is the word that it is, and that he has mentioned it before, is creative destruction. And which, when people hear that's not American. What creative destruction? And that's actually what they're doing in the financial sector. I mean, yeah, he did make some jobs, but the main thing was to make him and his people at Bain money. It wasn't really to help businesses, struggling, and we'll give you, like that, like a venture capitalist. It's a very different kind of, which actually Governor Perry during the debates put his finger on. I mean, this is very destructive, and this is what you want. So I think that bothers people. about how he's making this money because there's nothing that America can see come out of it. And, in fact, actually, you see it appears to be more and more negative as more and more people find out about it.
You know, Romney obviously lacks that common touch, and we spoke about this a few minutes ago briefly, but what are some of the other differences between him and the other super wealthy politicians like the Roosevelts, the Kennedys, the Rockefellers, who were able to connect with the average voter? I mean, actually,
I have a theory, but I don't know if it's true, but I suspect it is.
Do you want a drum roll? Do you want a drum roll before you do this?
Right, this is a first, right. But I started trying to understand what made people like Teddy Roosevelt, FDR, JFK, who are, multimillionaires many times over, what made them connect to other people so well. And what I came down to is every one of those men, all right, and they became president, of course, is that they were able to why they had the common touch and understand the common man, in quotes, like Copeland wrote in his beautiful music. Why that happened is because they each faced a terrible travail or hardship in their life, whether it was Kennedy and the PT boat, which left him basically crippled in a lot of pain. He began to understand what it was like at a very young age, because he was in his 20s when this happened to him during the Second World War.
Right.
He began to understand what suffering is. FDR was basically written off as basically a lightweight. But polio turned his life around, and he really began to understand people who were much less fortunate than he was. Teddy Roosevelt, the death of his wife, was devastating to him. And I think, again, it has such a lasting impact on him and his family that it was sort of like he took stock of himself and, in fact, actually went out to North Dakota and sort of regrouped himself there and trying to understand, and he came back a different person. And I think Romney lacks that kind of defining moment in his life that makes him, the light bulb go on his head and go, this is what suffering's like. Even if you have money, this is real suffering. And I think that's what has not happened to him. I think life has been too easy for Mitt Romney.
And you don't want to wish. Well, you don't want to wish anything bad on anybody, but you know what? But that really does make a lot of sense.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's just okay. Now, every time a Democrat points out the vast disparities in income and wealth, Republicans scream class warfare. But you point out you never hear an auto worker or a cop use that type of phrase.
No, isn't that interesting? The only people I hear saying this are some of those millionaires in Congress who love to say this. And Romney has said it once or twice himself, but now I notice lately he hasn't been saying it so much. But, yeah, and it's interesting. It's only coming from one direction, which is really weird when you stop and think about it, because the class warfare that's being waged is actually against the middle class and the working class and the poor. It is, all anybody's asking is the rich to do is go back. How about going back to the taxes under Clinton when you all did really well? Nobody is like saying, let's go back to after the Second World War, where it was astronomically high, I think over 75% or something. Nobody's asking for that. And yet they want it lowered still is what they're really after. And it's sort of interesting that you don't hear Democrats, progressives saying that. And it's why is it that we haven't caught on? I think it should be just like we took over the word Obamacare and it became, Obama cares. All right, so it became good. All right, now nobody's ashamed if you're a Democrat to go say around Obama. At least people I know aren't afraid anymore to say Obamacare. I think it's time to say, it's class warfare on us, and to start calling it out for what it is. So, because it is class warfare, what is going on.
Okay. Catherine Poe writes the ad-lib blog for the Washington Times Communities, joining us regularly here on americasdemocrats.org. Catherine, thank you so much for your time, as always. We look forward to speaking with you again soon.
Well, thank you. Until next time.
All righty. This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. We want you to sit back and listen, but we need you to stand up and fight. Help get our party back to its roots and to success at the ballot box. Make your contribution to Democrats for America's Future to keep this show on the air and help elect stand-up Democrats. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page. This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. And now Bill Press talks with Judd Legum about health care reform and Mitt Romney.
Judd Legum from Think Progress, thinkprogress.org. Check him out if you want to be up to date on all the latest on all the big issues that we care about as progressives in this country. Think Progress, sort of the communications, research, political arm of the Center for American Progress. I don't know.
I think that's a fair description. We'll take it.
Judd, good to see you. Good to see you. Let's see where we start today. Let's start with Mitt Romney. Yesterday goes to Israel, among other things. He praised the Israeli healthcare system, right? They have national healthcare in Israel, don't they?
National healthcare, and interestingly, a lot like the healthcare plan that he put in place in Massachusetts and Obamacare. They've got 4 different HMOs, essentially. Every Israeli citizen's required to purchase one.
Purchase insurance, right?
And they, have a different rates of subsidies based on your income. And he's actually right. They have a pretty good healthcare system. It's unclear how this squares with what he's been saying for this entire campaign, which was the national mandate would create sort of an economic collapse and all sorts of terrible outcomes for people and their medical care.
Well, you almost have to think that he didn't do, or he or his staff didn't do much research before he made this statement, because the Israeli healthcare system, you're right, there's an individual mandate. Everybody has to buy it, and there's a penalty if you don't buy it. He also praised the fact that they have kept their costs down. There's a story this morning, I was just looking for it, I think it's in the New York Times I read this morning, where the way they've kept their costs down is they have very, very tight government regulation of every step of it. That the government decides how many tests doctors can do, how much doctors get paid. I mean, it is much more government control than under Obamacare or even Romney Care, Massachusetts.
Sure, because there's only 4 plans, and they're very tightly regulated. Whereas under Obamacare, there's going to be all of the different plans that you have now, plus dozens of plans in various state exchanges. So there'll be a lot more variety under Obamacare. Some people didn't want to see that. Some people were more of an advocate of single payer, and there's certainly advantages to that. But the reality is, what we have was essentially what used to be considered a conservative idea, that we'd have a healthcare mandate, keep the private system, have some subsidies. Not really a very liberal or radical idea at all.
But it's not the biggest gaffe of Romney's trip, but it's yet another one, right, where he's praising the system. We ought to have a healthcare system like this. Be careful what you ask for, because you might get it. The other thing about the Affordable Care Act, which I think most people are unaware of, and millions more will soon be aware of, is that this month, they've already started, checks are being sent out by insurance companies to their customers under the Affordable Care Act, because one of the provisions of the Affordable Care Act, will you explain why they're getting these checks?
Well, there's sort of a basic rule they set down, which is if you're an insurance company, you have to spend 80% on medical care, and you get up to 20% for administration. And if you exceed the 20%, you then have to send rebates to all of your customers. Mm-hmm. And some companies were below the 20%. I got a letter saying my company, unfortunately, didn't spend more than 20% on their administrative costs. But
I haven't heard from ours yet. Have you, Peter? No?
No, I haven't.
Yeah.
Yeah, we got the letter, I guess, a little early. They're on top of the ball. Yeah. But millions of people are going to be receiving rebates, checks. Some people might receive just a few bucks. Some people will receive a substantial amount of money.
Yeah. I had lunch with a friend last week, and she said the first thing she said was, guess what? I just got a check from Kathleen Sebelius, what she meant, from the insurance company, but it said, we're sending you this because under the Affordable Care Act. So it's the New York Times reports this morning, insurers will pay out $1.1 billion. The average rebate will be $151 per household across the country. In Vermont, it's average $807 per family. Alaska, $622 per family. Alabama, average $518 per family. That's a lot of money.
Yeah, and this bill is exactly why the Republicans are so desperate to kill this legislation right now. Because they know, as people are actually exposed to the reality of universal health care and what the bill does, as opposed to the fear-mongering and the rhetoric and everything else, that it's going to be impossible to get rid of, because people are going to find, hey, they actually like the 80-20 rule. They actually like not being able to be disqualified because you have a pre-existing condition. So we're going to see more and more of this come online, especially as you get into 2013, 2014. All
right, Judd Legum from Think Progress here in studio with us. Did you get your check yet? 866-55-PRESS. And let me tell you, the fact that once these checks go out, again, it's going to be one more reason why it's harder and harder for Republicans to repeal the Affordable Care Act. They're never going to do it. I believe they're never going to do it. Mitt Romney, even if he were elected, God forbid, we're not going to let that happen, he would not be able to do it. Every time, the more stuff that kicks in, the more popular it is. Just moving on, because we've got a lot to cover. The Platform Committee of the Democratic National Committee, looking ahead toward the National Convention in Charlotte, met over the weekend in Minneapolis. They unanimously adopted language, we haven't seen the language yet, adopted language which supports same-sex marriage, and recommended that this go in the party platform in Charlotte. This is big news. Really historic, because you've obviously never had a major party adopt this as part of their platform. Obama's decision kind of signaled this and opened the door for this. But he didn't go that far, right? And he hasn't yet, actually. Yeah. But you might have, you might have seen it anyway. And this was what put some of the pressure on Obama to kind of get his views out there and to shift his position, because people were gearing up for a fight in the platform. And they said, it's important to have marriage equality in the Democratic Party platform. And so now I think, and you saw it passed unanimously with the drafting committee, and it sort of seems like the writing's on the wall that this is going to get in there. I think if Obama hadn't have switched his position, it would have been more contentious, obviously, because generally what you want to do is have your party platform. Doesn't have to be this way, but you have it kind of match up with where your nominee is. And now I think it is going to be a strength, because the Democratic Party's pretty much in line, from the top pretty much all the way down with their candidates. I mean, I'm old enough to remember the days when there were fights over the party platform at the conventions, and there were also battles over who was going to be the vice presidential nominee. I don't remember those, and who was going to be the presidential nominee. Now everything is all set ahead of time, right? So the last thing they want is any little controversy. They want it just to be like the Olympics, a TV show, right? Yeah. But this does mean, with Nancy Pelosi behind it, Debbie Wasserman Schultz, the national chair behind it, with Harry Reid behind it, it's going to be part of the platform. Yeah. Wouldn't you say? I think so. I mean, it seems like that's where we're going. And 2012 is going to be a really interesting year, because you've seen in the states, although we've seen this momentum across a lot of fronts in favor of marriage equality, you've seen in the states when it's come up for votes that a lot of times voters have rejected it. We saw that in North Carolina. Most recently in North Carolina. But this year, there's signs that they might break that streak. Maryland, Washington State are both going to have it on the ballots. And it seems like, if you look at the polls, that the side, pro marriage equality side, are doing better and look like they could be successful. So that would be a big change if, when presented to voters, vote in a random form, which is, of course, you can easily sort of manipulate
the voters this way through ads and everything else in that kind of format, if they then approve marriage equality, that would be a big thing.
Right. I mean, when only 7 states and the District of Columbia so far have approved marriage equality, for the Democratic Party to approve it as part of their national platform, I think is really bold. It's courageous. I think it's the right thing to do. And I think in the end, it'll help the Democratic Party. 866-55-PRESS. If you want to comment on that, huge, as Judd said, historical significance. Judd Legum from Think Progress. Judd Legum in studio with us from Think Progress with our Tuesdays with Judd segment. Judd, I want to ask you about, well, first, Lisa wanted to join in. We were talking about checks from insurance companies. Lisa got one. Calling from the great state of Texas. Hi, Lisa.
Hey, Bill, I love your show.
Well, thank you. Thank you for joining us.
Hey, I received a $499 check 2 weeks ago. My sister received a $548 check, and my other friend received a $500 check, all from Blue Cross Blue Shield, saying that they didn't meet the 80-20 rule.
Now, you know what? Here's the thing, Lisa. You know where that money would have gone if it had not been for the Affordable Care Act, right?
Correct. It says that the money went to advertising and administrative salaries. It gave you a nice little layout on why they had to give you that money back.
That's good, and that would have gone right into the pockets of Blue Cross and maybe into the pockets of some big administrator from Blue Cross. Instead, it's going. And I imagine, Lisa. Now, I don't want to. That $500 means a lot to you.
Well, I'm self-employed. I'm an attorney in Texas, and my insurance has gone from $200 and some a month to $564 a month in a couple of years.
Whoa!
And I was really shocked when I got to my office and it was laying on my desk because I have an office that employs less than 50 people. That's why I got a check back.
Mm-hmm.
But it was shocking, and it's shocking a lot of people. I took to Twitter. I put a picture of it on Twitter. I put a picture of it on Facebook. Because people need to know. They're so uneducated. They need to know.
Exactly. You know what else? Hey, Lisa, it's so good to hear from you. Big primary down in Texas today with Tea Party or Ted Cruz, right? Looks like he's going. By all accounts, looks like he's going to win. Looks like he's going to win that runoff. But Lisa's point is correct. The Obama administration, they ought to be out there talking about these refunds. Hey, you're getting a check, right? You're getting a check thanks to me.
Yeah, I mean, you want to repeal Obamacare? Who wants to send their checks back? Because that's what's gonna happen. Maybe not this year's check, but next year you're not going to get the check if you repeal Obamacare.
They ought to be jumping all over this, right? Yeah, right. I just sent you a check. John Boehner wants your check back, right? Mitt Romney, let's keep it right there. Mitt Romney wants your check back. We're going to be talking the foreign policy, the policy implications of Mitt Romney's trip to around London, Israel, and Poland, Judd. But you reported on the reporter's not very happy with those who are following Mitt Romney.
Yeah. Well, they're
petting zoo.
I mean, and this is Greta Van Susteren, who generally is pretty sympathetic to the Republican side. Certainly not a liberal partisan.
Fox News.
Yeah, Fox News, and said she feels like she's in a petting zoo. I guess she went over there to interview Romney, and then of course this morning there was a huge blow up with the reporters over there getting told that one of their aides told them to kiss my ass. I think you talked about that earlier. But I think it's a reflection of you can try to tightly manage these trips, but at a certain point, there's going to be a level of frustration, and you don't want the traveling press to turn on you.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the thing. Maybe you want to limit your questions and try to avoid mistakes, but if you have the group of people and they turn on you, that's when the problems really start.
And maybe the traveling press are not your best friends in the world. You don't consider them, but you don't make friends by telling them to kiss my ass, which is what one of the aides told reporters this morning. And finally, we never have enough time, but there was a report by NBC yesterday caught my attention. We talked about a little bit earlier that if you look at CEOs in this country from the Fortune 500, they actually they've done pretty well, corporate profits at an all-time high, but the CEOs support Romney over Obama by a margin of 4-1. So, I mean, what does Obama have to do to win support from the business community?
Well, I don't think he's necessarily going to get those folks. But if you look at the CEO vote, isn't a huge vote. But Romney's tax plan, if you look at it, is really geared towards the CEO. There's a big, you take the Bush tax cuts, you make them permanent, and then you have a big 20% cut over top of that, which would really be a huge, drastic pay cut. Now, what's interesting is under the Obama administration, corporate profits are doing very, very well. The stock market is almost doubled from where it was. Mm-hmm. If you remember, right when Obama took over, it was around in the 6,000s, where we were up over 13,000. So corporations are actually doing pretty well now. They're not taking that money and hiring, which is an issue. But I think ultimately, Romney understands the mentality of the CEO. He was a CEO. This is what his business did, and really his policies are geared around it. So you really can't blame him. If you're a CEO, personally, the Romney policies are going to benefit you a lot. And so I think if you're looking just from that perspective, it's not surprising you're going to find a lot of support for Romney.
If you're among the 0.0001% of Americans, right, who had these big companies, you're right. Romney is your guy.
Yep.
You might
absolutely.
He's your guy, and Obama's not. If you're a member of a working class, middle class family, Obama's your guy. Hey, Judd, always great to see you. Thanks for coming in. Judd, it's thinkprogress.org, and on Twitter, it's at Judd Legum. Thanks, Judd.
Thanks.
All right.
That's all for americasdemocrats.org. Thank you to all who made today's show possible. Bob Edgar, Catherine Poe, and the entire Bill Press team. And thank you for listening. If you liked what you heard, please get involved in our efforts to keep this show going and to elect Democrats who are bringing the party back to its roots. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page. And be sure to find 21st Century Democrats on Facebook. For americasdemocrats.org, I'm your host, Jim Cuddy. We want you to sit back and listen, but we need you to stand up and fight. Join us, support the show, and help elect Democrats who will stand up for democratic principles with your contribution today. Go to